Chapter 211. Something happened. As Neil began to give himself reasons not to take the steps he was about to take, lighting flashed in the sky, and then the sound of thunder followed, snapping him back to his senses. When the first drop of rain hit his windshield, his heart slammed against his ribs as he recalled how Mia was terrified of rain. Without wasting any time, he drove like a madman back to the hospital. Now in the hospital room with the trembling Mia, Neil buried his head into the crook of her neck and inhaled her sweet scent as he rocked her in his arms, whispering words of comfort. She trembled in his arms and cried with every sound of thunder. He shouldn't have left her. He should have stayed with her. He cursed himself for his foolishness in leaving her, or even considering the idea of making her a part of his enemies. They had both suffered enough in their childhood. It was time to help her slowly heal from her trauma. He would never forgive Ella nor Kelvin, but that didn't mean Mia should suffer for it. She was his now, and he would protect her with every fiber of his being. If not recalling their childhood would save her from remembering all the trauma she had endured at her own father's hands, then Neil was okay with that. He would ensure she knew nothing of Kelvin Rodrigo being her real father. Deciding, he pulled her down with him onto the bed, and she clutched onto him tightly, as if fearing he would disappear if she let go. He tenderly pressed his lips against her forehead to reassure her that he would never leave her again. As he adjusted her to straddle his waist with her legs and laid her head against his chest, he held her with his right hand while pulling the blanket over their bodies with his other hand, covering them completely. Running his large hand up and down her spine, he began to sing her favorite song. If his soothing words didn't work, his song did the job. She began to breathe steadily, her chest rising and falling peacefully against his, both her hands clutching tightly to his shirt. He held her close to his heart, because she would always be close to his heart no matter what. "I love you," he whispered huskily as he tightened his hold around her and closed his eyes to get some sleep as well. He hadn't had a good night's sleep for a long time, but he had a feeling he was about to with her in his arms. Mia awoke to the gentle caress of sunlight dancing across her face, casting a warm glow over her features. Stirring from her slumber, she felt the weight of something holding her in place on the bed. Attempting to move, she realized it was a strong arm wrapped securely around her waist from behind, the touch of his palm comforting against her growing baby bump. Turning her gaze downward, Mia found herself captivated by the sight of his arm, a protective embrace that both grounded and reassured her. He held her tightly against his front, her back pressed against him, with one of his legs gently trapping hers under the blanket. His warm breath fell over her neck from behind, stirring the little hairs on her nape. A surge of warmth traveled from her heart to her lower abdomen as she realized Neil had come back to her last night and slept with her. For some unknown reason, she had thought she had lost him last night, believing he would never return to her again. She had felt in her heart that it was over, but she had been wrong. She didn't know when he had come back, but the fact that he did filled her heart with love and tenderness towards him. With a soft sigh, she reached out to intertwine her fingers with his, savoring the familiar touch that spoke volumes of their connection. His hand was large and warm, she thought with a faint smile. Turning slowly within his grasp to see his face, Mia beheld the sight before her. His sleeping visage was an embodiment of masculine allure. Disheveled locks of thick black hair cascaded over his forehead, a few stray strands framing his chiseled features. His lips, usually set in a determined line, were now relaxed in slumber, giving him a softer, more vulnerable expression. Her gaze traced the angles of his face, from the firm jawline to the straight nose, each detail etched with a perfection that always stole her breath away. Staring at his lips, she recalled all the sinful things he had done to her with them, and her breath hitched in excitement. Unable to stop herself, her fingers grazed his lips, his jaw, his nose. Mia couldn't help but marvel at the sight before her, the intimacy of the moment enveloping her in a haze of longing and adoration. Her hand continued their exploration, trailing down to where his shirt lay slightly undone, revealing a glimpse of his strong, masculine form beneath the fabric. Cupping his cheek in her palm, Mia leaned in close, her breath mingling with his as she whispered, "I love you." In response, his arms tightened around her, pulling her closer as he stirred from sleep. His voice, husky with morning warmth, brushed against her ear as he murmured, "Good morning, princess," sending a rush of excitement coursing through her veins. When his intoxicating, lazy silver eyes met hers, Mia felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment at the boldness of her actions while he slept. With her palm pressed flat against his chest, she could feel the steady beating of his heart. "Good morning," she replied, feeling the same delicious stirring of her senses that she always experienced when looking into his eyes, cautiously lowering her gaze to the column of his throat. "Why did you stop?" he asked. "What?" She looked up at him in confusion, and his hand that was around her waist moved up to cup the side of her neck while his thumb grazed the sensitive skin there. "Touching me," he whispered huskily. "Why did you stop?" His warm breath fell on her lips, their closeness palpable. "You weren't asleep?" she asked, feeling even more embarrassed that he had felt her touching him. But he chuckled at the color in her cheeks, his voice rumbling in his chest, a low timbre that resonated with desire and affection, igniting a fire within her that burned brighter with each passing moment. "I was asleep until I felt your touch," he said, his legs coming over hers again under the blanket, and his hand slowly moving lower from her neck to her chest. "So I guess it's my turn to touch you as well," he whispered, his hand finding her breast and giving it a gentle squeeze, eliciting a moan from her lips. He smiled in satisfaction at the delicious sound that left her mouth and stirred his own desire that had been unquenched since yesterday where they had been interrupted. But as much as he wanted to continue where they had left yesterday, he had some important things to attend to this morning, and his presence was needed at the office. Despite that, he didn't withdraw his hand from her breast and slip them into her gown to touch her without the barrier of her garment fabric. "Do you recall what happened last night?" he asked softly, his hand teasingly playing with her hardened nipple and wishing he could put his mouth there and make love to her this morning. He could already feel his trousers tightening in an uncomfortable way. "What happened?" she gasped, attempting to concentrate and recollect if anything had occurred the night before, but his hand beneath her gown was making it difficult for her to think of anything other than his current actions. Neil got his answers. She'd forgotten about the rain incident just like the doctor had said. Even if she were to get triggered by something that might remind her of her childhood, it would be gone the moment she found comfort. He didn't know whether to be happy or worry about that, but then at this moment, he liked that she'd forgotten. At least it wouldn't come as another burden to her. He didn't want her to have anything to worry about, and he was determined to keep her away from everything and anything that might cause her distress from now onwards. "Did something happen last night?" she inquired, finally able to focus as his hand paused its movements on her breast, though it remained there, gently cupping it, making her body heat up with desires for more. She couldn't recall any specific incident that happened last night, but she remembered fretting that he might be upset with her for supporting Rain. When he shook his head, she regarded him suspiciously and questioned, "Then why didn't you return to me sooner? Was it because I didn't want Rain to leave?" Before he could respond, she continued, "If Jason is an asshole, Rain is nothing like him. I've known her for a long time, and trust me when I say she would have intervened to stop my humiliation if she could. She's my only friend, and I couldn't bear the thought of you trying to send her away yesterday." "You..." Mia didn't get to finish her words before he dragged her more firmly into his arms. Slipping his hand out of her gown, he cradled her face between his hands, chuckling while he kissed her, and then slowly, the laughter faded as she held him to her and kissed him back. She parted her lips for his tongue, welcoming each thrust of his tongue in her mouth. A kiss that started like a form of apology from Neil's part turned intense. His mouth moved over hers, sucking and probing in a kiss that was coaxing, yet breathtakingly insistent. With a smothered moan, she leaned into him as if she wanted to fit perfectly with him. His arm tightened around her, imprisoning her against his hardened form, while his mouth opened hungrily, his tongue plunging into her mouth and stroking against hers. Heat surged through Mia and she arched her hips against his hardened, bulging erection. A low, rambling groan came from his throat at her actions, and he flipped her over rolling atop of her while kissing and nibbling her neck. Her hands lifted compulsively to caress his neck and slid through the soft hair at his nape as she eagerly responded to his hungry mouth that was now sucking her nipples through her garment, turning her into a moaning mess. Chapter 212 Home. Knowing that a doctor would soon come in to check up on Mia, Neil knew that he couldn't take their necking far. His erection was already throbbing with an intense need to be inside her, to be one with her, to feel her warm entrance welcome him and take him in completely. He cursed against her lips as he fought with the demons in his head to stop right now, when he could. If he didn't stop now, and if the lovely woman under him didn't stop arching her hips against his erection, he was damned sure nothing would stop him until they were both naked and spent from lovemaking. With a reluctant groan, he tore his mouth from hers and rolled back to the side, moving her along with him. "I love you," he whispered, trying to bring them both back to their senses. You make me so damn happy. You make living on a mountain cabin with no internet seem like fun. You make me excited. Even in Verdantia, when you weren't with me, I'd dream of the way you dragged me home, half frozen, and the way you danced with me and made love to me, and I'd wake up wanting you. And I'm sorry I didn't come back to you sooner yesterday. She smiled, still trying to catch her breath from their intense kissing. She was glad that apologies seemed to come easy from him now, or perhaps it was just for her, and she was over the moon to hear him say the words she'd always been dying to hear in the mountains. She brushed her fingertips over his lips and rubbed her cheek against his chest. Someday soon, would you take me to Verdantia, so we can stay in your yacht? I dreamed of being there with you when we used to call. It isn't much of a yacht. I'll buy another one for you, and we'll take a cruise on it, he said, playing with the strands of her hair between his fingers. She shook her head. No. I'd like to stay with you on the yacht in Verdantia, just the way it was, even if it's only for a week. Neil smiled. Then how about we have our honeymoon there? Let's announce our relationship. I plan to have a banquet in a few weeks to reveal my identity. We could announce our marriage then and make it official to the world. What do you think? He asked, looking down at her, eager to hear her agree to his plan of their marriage. But Mia's smiling face slowly began to fade at the thought of their marriage happening so soon. Not to mention attending another banquet after her bad experience at the Wallace's banquet. She wanted nothing more than to be married to Neil, but she wanted so much to be courted and proposed to in a traditional manner. However, she didn't want to tell him that and wanted him to do it out of his own accord. They'd only had a fake date at the mountain and not a real one. Noticing her slightly dejected look, Neil used his fingertips to lift her chin so she could look up at him. What's wrong? He asked softly. You don't want to attend the banquet because you fear what happened last time would happen again? That was one, but not the main reason for her dejection. But she nodded her head anyway, and he caressed her cheeks. Don't worry, nothing like that will happen again. Then he kissed her forehead. I have to leave now. I have an important meeting at 9 this morning. I will be back in the afternoon. Can I go home today? She asked quickly before he could pull away from her. I don't want to spend another day here. It's boring and depressing, she complained. No, you can't. The doctors need to monitor you for another day. You will be discharged tomorrow, he assured tenderly while caressing her cheeks and wishing he could stay with her to keep her company. I don't want to. I feel completely fine, and besides, a nurse can come home with me. I don't like it here. It's suffocating and lonely if you're not here. She looked up at him with her puppy eyes. Please, sweetheart, I want to go home today. Please. She pouted her lips childishly. She couldn't imagine herself being here for another day. She'd go crazy if he didn't agree to let her get discharged today. Seeing her eyes and the way she addressed him, Neil could not dare to deny her request. He was smiling from ear to ear as he pulled her in for a quick kiss. All right, let's have breakfast together. Then I'll drop you at home before I head to my office, he said. Home? You mean my residence? She asked. No, you will be staying at my house from now on. Owen sat in the sterile confines of the hospital room, his gaze fixed on the nurse bustling about. He couldn't help but notice the fear etched into her delicate features as she changed his bandage. And he loved to see fear in insignificant people who think they could annoy him and get away with it, just like this damned nurse. She moved with a hesitance that mirrored her trepidation, her hands trembling slightly as she unwrapped the bandage encasing his wounded arm. He remembered the incident a few days ago that had made her so terrified of him now. A few days ago, when he had been rushed into the hospital by his men after the beating he'd received from Neil, his anger had been unbearable. He'd wanted to inflict pain on someone, and the nurse had seemed like an easy prey at that time. And as foolish as she was, she'd tried to flirt with him while fixing his arm. She'd even made the mistake of adding too much pressure on his painful arm as all her focus was on how to make him notice her boobs instead of his arm. Her stupid mistake had been met with a grip around her neck that had almost knocked the soul out of her insignificant body. His anger had surely left an impression on her because now she was being careful and her dress was buttoned to the top. He had meant to scare the shit out of her to feel good about himself after that fucking son of a bitch, Wayner, had dared to hit him in that banquet. Did Wayner think by breaking his arm and bruising his ribs that the war between them would be over? Then he must be out of his fucking mind if he thought so. Owen Sullivan never gives up until he gets what he wanted. And what did he want so badly? Mia fucking Harrison? They are messing with the wrong person. He would make sure he made Neil Wayner beg on his knees for his mercy, and he would make sure Mia worshipped him like a god and saw him as her only savior. However, for now, he had to wait until his ribs and broken arm were healed before he could leave this damned hospital and teach them both a lesson. Now, as the nurse tended to him in the VIP room, Owen's patience wore thin. His good hand tapped impatiently against the bed, a silent demand for her to hurry and leave him be before he'd strangle her to death and bury her body where no one would ever find her. He had more pressing matters on his mind than a simple bandage change and the sight of her. This morning, he'd woken up with his phone beeping with dozens of messages and calls from the office. For the past 3 days he'd been in the hospital, his company had been going down the drain. "I'm afraid we're facing a critical situation. Our investors are withdrawing their investments at an alarming rate, and our stock prices have plummeted unexpectedly," Eamon, his assistant, had informed him over the phone this morning. "It's quite serious, sir. The sudden withdrawal of investments is severely impacting our cash flow, and the declining stock prices are eroding our asset base rapidly." Owen couldn't believe the empire he was on the journey of building was falling. Though he'd started his company with the help of the Rodrigo enterprise, he'd continued it with his hard work. He'd studied business management in the university and was doing good with his company until now. He didn't have to be told to know that all of his investors were running back to the uprising Galvera enterprise that had been all over the news lately. If he didn't act fast, it would be only a matter of a month before he'd go bankrupt. The only choice he had now was to accept the invitation he'd received from the Galvera about some banquet and make friends with Xavier, even though he didn't know the man personally but still despised him to the bones. Now that Neil Wayner was back, the last thing Owen wanted was to be his number two. If he were to be a partner with the Galvera enterprise, everything would work just fine, and his plan for revenge against Neil would still go smoothly. However, he couldn't wait to get discharged and think of his next plans for Mia. With each passing moment, Owen's frustration grew, his impatience palpable in the air. Just as he was about to dismiss the annoying nurse, the door creaked open, admitting another figure into the room, the sound of elegant heels clanking against the floor. Even without seeing her face, due to the mask she wore, Owen knew who it was. "Scram!" he barked at the nurse, his tone sharp and commanding, his attention focused solely on the newcomer, who was dressed in all black with a pair of sunglasses and a mask concealing her face. The nurse flinched at his words, her nervousness palpable as she hastily finished her task and made a hasty exit. On her way out, she bowed slightly to the imposing figure standing at the doorway. Chapter 213 Amazing Feeling. Mia sat nestled in the plush leather seat of Neil's Rolls-Royce, her head resting gently on his shoulder, her arms wrapped around his. She felt a sense of peace and contentment as the car smoothly cruised down the winding road. They had eaten their breakfast together in the hospital room where Neil had coaxed her into eating more than she normally does. "The doctor said you have to eat more and healthy," he had told her while holding the spoon to her tightly sealed mouth. "Now, be a good girl and open your mouth, my love, before you make me feed you in a way I'd enjoy." She'd been curious about what other way he was talking about and refused to open her mouth, but he'd looked at her with a challenging smirk and said, "Fine, I'll do it my own way then." To her utter surprise, he took the food into his own mouth and grabbed her head before she could protest. Then he fed her through his mouth while taking his luxurious time to kiss her senseless in the process. It was more kissing than feeding. His phone had been ringing incessantly while he was at the hospital and still continued to do so in the car. Despite this, he persisted in ignoring it, a behavior he had maintained throughout the day. Even after she had given him permission to leave for work and instructed the driver to take her to his house, he adamantly refused, insisting on escorting her home first before heading to the office. He had mentioned having a crucial meeting at 9, but it was now almost noon, and he appeared as composed as ever in his seat. Mia was on the verge of urging him to answer his phone, but as they neared the iron gates of the mansion, her words faltered. She sat up straight as the grand mansion gates came into view. The gates slid open seamlessly, revealing a grand driveway that curved around an immense fountain, its water sparkling like liquid diamonds in the early afternoon sun. Mia's breath hitched as the full view of the mansion came into sight. It was a sprawling estate, its facade a blend of classic elegance and modern luxury. Tall, stately columns framed the entrance, and large windows glinted in the sunlight. Manicured gardens surrounded the estate, with perfectly trimmed hedges and vibrant flowers adding splashes of color to the pristine landscape. When the car came to a stop in front of the grand entrance, a man in a suit promptly stepped forward to open the door for them. Mia emerged slowly, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the grandeur of the mansion. The entrance was equally impressive, with an intricate wrought iron door that stood tall and imposing, flanked by marble statues and topiaries shaped into elegant forms. Neil circled the car and offered his arm to Mia, leading her up the steps and through the massive doorway. Inside, the mansion was even more breathtaking. The foyer was vast, with a sweeping staircase made of polished mahogany, crystal chandeliers casting a warm, inviting glow, and floors of gleaming marble that seemed to stretch endlessly. "Is this your house?" Mia asked, her voice filled with awe as she turned to Neil, her eyes still wide with amazement. Though she'd expected his house to be grand and luxurious, it was not as huge as this. It looked like an estate built for presidents. "Yes," Neil replied, a satisfied smile playing on his lips as he noticed her awestruck expression. "It will be our home now. I've had the property for a while but haven't lived in it until now. I want to make it into our home. Do you like it?" Mia could only nod, her words momentarily lost in the splendor surrounding her. Neil's pride was evident as he watched her reaction, pleased to see her so taken by their new home. Anytime soon, he knew, they'd build a home filled with their children because he planned to have many and be the father he'd never had to them. And with that thought, he couldn't wait to get married to her and let the world know she belonged to him alone. Though he had to leave for the office soon, Neil was determined to show Mia their room. Holding her arm gently, he guided her up the grand staircase, each step echoing in the vast space. They walked down a long corridor lined with exquisite artwork and ornate mirrors until they reached a set of double doors. Neil pushed them open to reveal a spacious, beautifully decorated bedroom. The room was a sanctuary of luxury, with a large, four-poster bed draped in rich fabrics, a seating area by the floor-to-ceiling windows, and a balcony that offered a stunning view of the estate grounds. "This is where we'll stay from now on," Neil said softly, his hand resting on the small of Mia's back as they stepped inside. "I've arranged everything so we can be together here. Even your clothes have been moved to the closet yesterday." Mia turned to him, her eyes shining. "My clothes?" she asked, stunned. "Yes, I sent the maids and my men to your residence while you were in the hospital, and they brought your clothes and other important things back here. With your cat, who didn't fail to leave scratches on them when they tried to carry him back here," he assured, knowing how much she liked the cat. "You brought my cat as well?" Her eyes brightened in excitement, and when he nodded, she smiled, "Thank you." "Do you like our room?" he asked her, wanting to hear her opinion on the room he'd personally chosen the decor and design to Mia's liking. If it were up to him, everything would be black and gray, but because of wanting to please her, he'd made sure everything was in bright colors. Mia's eyes shone with contentment as she looked around the magnificent room one more time. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I love it." Neil smiled, drawing her close. "I'm glad," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Welcome home, Mia." Neil drove to his office with a sense of contentment he hadn't felt in a long time. After making sure Mia was settled at home and had everything she needed, he could finally turn his attention to the day's work. But his thoughts still lingered on her, on the way her eyes had lit up at the sight of their new home, and the gleaming happiness in those sparkling brown eyes of hers that would melt anyone's heart, just like it had always melted his heart and made him into an emotional yo-yo ready to dance at her feet. As the car pulled up to the imposing building of Galvera Enterprise, James rushed out to meet him on the way. "Xavier, why are you late?" "The board of directors have been waiting in the conference room for hours," James said, his voice tinged with urgency as the meeting was important to the company. With a small smile on his typically stoic face, Neil replied, "I had more important matters to attend to at home." James, aware of the significance of this meeting, couldn't help but ask, what could be more important than this meeting? Neil cast him a cold side glance, his gray eyes like ice. "My wife," he said simply, and strode past his assistant, leaving James speechless and wondering since when he had been married. Inside the conference room, the head board members were grumbling about their CEO's tardiness when the door swung open. Neil entered, his tall frame clad in a sharp black suit that accentuated his commanding presence. His usual stone-cold face gleamed slightly, a subtle indication of his good mood. The directors, who remembered the last tense meeting where Neil's overwhelming authority had almost made them cower, noticed the change immediately and couldn't help but wonder what put him in such a good mood. The meeting commenced smoothly, with Neil listening attentively, or so it seemed. In truth, his mind wandered back home. Home, he thought with a smile, was the most beautiful place when you had someone waiting for you. His thoughts were filled with Mia, and he couldn't wait to return to her, to make love to her tonight in their room and wake up next to her every morning. Was this how every man feels when they have a woman to return to at home? The feeling was foreign and amazing. "Sir, what do you think?" one of the directors asked, breaking Neil from his reverie. "I think it's lovely," he replied absent-mindedly, his mind still on his home rather than the meeting. And because his answers did not match the question asked, the directors exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to interpret his unusual display of emotion and his lack of attention. "Mr. Galvera, I was asking for your opinion on our next project in New York City." The man who was doing the presentation repeated his question. Realizing his lapse, Neil quickly refocused on the task at hand, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Mia and the present he wanted to buy for her on his way back home to make her more happy. "We need a strong." And so the meeting continued smoothly. After the meeting, Neil returned to his office, his focus shifting back to business and suppressing his emotions for when he'd go back home. He had just settled at his desk when James entered, carrying a stack of documents. "These contain the research we've done on Kelvin Rodrigo and his illegal activities," James said, placing the files Neil had asked for in front of him. The moment Neil saw the documents, his expression hardened, all traces of his earlier warmth gone. He flipped through the pages with a cold, calculating gaze. Reaching the third document, he realized it was full details of how he used children in the past to travel with drugs to deliver to his client in other countries. There was also some information stating he usually traveled with his daughter to each and every business meeting in the past. His daughter, Neil thought with a sickening feeling in his stomach as realization slowly dawned on him. Mia. Controlling his rage and the twist in his gut, he looked at James. "How did you manage to get all this information?" "It wasn't easy. We had to bribe a few people to get them talking," James said, satisfied that Neil seemed to find his handiwork valuable. "Well, some were threatened with the lives of their loved ones. We managed to get our hands on one of the doctors who performed the surgeries on the children years ago. He's in our custody. If you'd like to meet him yourself, you are always free to drop by." He would be more than glad to meet the doctor, Neil thought, hoping whatever he was thinking wasn't the case. If he were to confirm that Kelvin Rodrigo had used the younger Mia for drugs, he might as well just kill the man and finish him off easily. But then Neil thought death would be an easier punishment for a monster like Kelvin. Kelvin Rodrigo deserved to suffer and see the empire he'd used innocent bloods to build collapse before his eyes. Neil wanted him to lose everything. Without his wealth, Kelvin would be nothing but a waste. "I'd like to meet the doctor," he said. "I will drive down to the dungeon tonight." James nodded, knowing if the doctor still continued to act stubborn and not reveal everything, things would get more intense if Neil should go there. "I've also been working on tracking down the person responsible for those videos of Mia online," he reported. "And?" Neil's tone was sharp, expectant. "The person is very skilled at covering their tracks. We haven't found anything conclusive yet. All we know is that the videos were posted through a burner account before it was spread across all social media." Neil's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Keep digging. I want this resolved as soon as possible. I want the bastard tortured to death," he said. "What else?" James hesitated, a slight falter in his usual confident demeanor as he held something behind his back, reluctant to bring it forward to show his boss. He'd noticed Neil's good mood today, and showing him this was going to ruin it for sure. Noticing this, Neil raised an eyebrow. "What are you hiding?" he asked, stretching out his hand. "Let me see." Reluctantly, James handed over the Times Entertainment magazine he'd mistakenly packed among the documents but had no intentions of showing it to Neil. The headline of the magazine blared, "Who is the father of Mia Harrison's child?" Neil's eyes narrowed as he read through the article. His hands tightened around the magazine, his knuckles turning white. The news about Mia's pregnancy had leaked to the media, despite his plans to announce it at the banquet he planned to have in a few days. The speculation within the article only fueled his rage. It suggested that one of Mia's former online escorts or even Owen Sullivan could be the father. There was no mention of Neil being the father, and that slight stung more deeply than anything else. He was the father of their child, and he'd proudly take responsibility for it. The fact that people were speculating nonsense about his woman and their unborn child made him so mad he wanted to hit the person who'd made this article. His mind flashed back to the incident at the Wallace banquet, where he had made it abundantly clear that Mia was his woman. Yet, the media persisted in their baseless assumptions, disrespecting her and their relationship. Neil slammed the magazine onto his desk, his face a mask of fury. "It seems some people need a clearer message," he said through gritted teeth. "They will learn not to mess with Mia again. What should we do then?" Neil took a deep breath, reining in his temper. "First, find out who leaked this information. Second, invite the media to my banquet. I want it crystal clear who Mia belongs to, and that any further disrespect will have severe consequences." "Yes, Xavier." As James left the office to carry out Neil's orders, Neil stared at the magazine, his thoughts drifting back to Mia. He'd have to make sure she wouldn't see this damned magazine nor get a whiff of all the lies published on and about her. Protecting her and their child had become his utmost priority, and he would stop at nothing to ensure their safety and happiness first. Glancing down at his wristwatch, he noticed the time was moving slower than usual, and he cursed under his breath before he resumed his work while checking his time every minute. Chapter 214 Not in the House. Neil left the office when the sun began to set, and on his way home, he stopped at a jewelry store and bought a set of diamond necklaces and earrings for Mia. He'd heard that women liked jewelry, thus he swiped his card a few times to buy anything he thought would suit her and complement her beauty. It was very unusual for men to visit a jewelry store, so when Neil was seen walking around the glass boxes and pointing to the ones he liked for the assistant, who looked too happy to assist him, he became the center of attention at the store. They all knew who he was, but who he was buying all those jewels for was a mystery to them. Due to the media not being allowed to enter the Wallace birthday party, nobody but the elites who'd been present had heard of the scene Neil had created to stand up for Mia. Many of the people still believed he'd broken up with Mia after her scandal. They couldn't help but look on in envy as he kept picking the most expensive set of necklaces now. And when he unhesitatingly swiped his black card to complete his purchase, the women felt like they'd pass out from the envy that surged through their hearts. The moment he walked out with the bags of his purchases, the women squealed dreamily. "Gosh, he's so handsome, and whoever that woman is, she's so damned lucky to have a hunk like Wayner. I wish my boyfriend would buy me jewelry. HMPH. Dream on, girl. Your boyfriend's too greedy and stingy. That man's not gonna spend a thing on you. You better change a man if you want someone like Wayner," advised one of the store assistants to the other, who glared at her. Neil sat in the back seat of his Rolls-Royce, watching the setting sun with a relaxed expression on his face. His thoughts drifted to Mia, wondering if she missed him as much as he missed her. He'd been looking at his watch, hoping desperately for the time to pass so he'd go home to her. And he smiled at the notion of them making love tonight in their bed after putting it off for 2 days at the hospital. Tonight, he knew without a doubt, would be wonderful for both of them. He smiled up at the setting sun, wearing his love on his sleeves. The sun seemed more beautiful today, its warm hues casting a serene glow over the landscape of Mirage Mesa. Even the ride back home felt different, not the boring journey it used to be to him in the past. He remembered the times he had driven down the roads of Mirage Mesa with a stabbing pain in his heart. Rage and hate had surged through him, making it impossible to breathe or look out the window. He had always closed his eyes, refusing to see the streets he had walked barefoot as a 12-year-old, desperately searching for a place to call home. Those memories had haunted him, but now, as he looked out at the familiar roads, he felt nothing. The wounds of the past had started to heal slowly, replaced by the warmth of his present with Mia, and he knew for as long as they stayed together, his wounds would heal completely. As the car cruised down the road, Neil's anticipation to see his woman after a stressful day at work grew. He couldn't wait to reach home. When they arrived, he stepped out with the bags containing the jewelry he had bought for Mia. Entering the house, he loosened his tie and climbed the stairs to their room, expecting to find her there. But as he pushed the door open, he was met with an empty room and an undisturbed bed, just as he had left it. Frowning, Neil dropped the bags on the bed and walked to the bathroom and found it empty as well. A sense of unease crept over him as his long legs pulled him to the walk-in closet. His heart slammed against his ribs when he saw that all of Mia's belongings that had been arranged in the closet were gone. Panic began to settle within him, a cold dread squeezed his chest and knotted his stomach. His mind raced with fear that she had left him. No, she would never do that. She'd looked happy when he brought her home from the hospital, and she liked their house so much she'd walked him to his car when he was leaving for the office. He'd watched her through the car mirror until the car drove out of the gate. But now, it didn't seem like she'd even stayed in the room for a second after he'd left for the office. "Don't do this to me, Mia," he muttered to himself as he turned on his heels. His steps quickened as he ran down the stairs, nearly tripping in his haste. He shouted for the housekeeper, his voice echoing through the vast hallways. "Well, yes, sir," the housekeeper stammered, rushing out of the kitchen at his thundering calls. She trembled at the murderous look in his hardened eyes. Neil didn't care about her fear. "Where is she?" he demanded, his tone harsh and desperate. The housekeeper understood immediately who he was referring to, and replied with a slight bow, "Miss Mia is in the east wing of the house. She moved her things to the guest room just a while ago with the help of the maids." Neil didn't wait for her to finish. He stormed off towards the east wing, anger and confusion propelling him forward. His body raced with several emotions. First, he was relieved that she was within the house and hadn't left him. Second, he was angry that she made him almost lose his mind from fear. But one thing was clear. He needed to find her and know why she had moved out of their room. He angrily walked into one of the guest rooms in the east wing without bothering to knock. He had expected to find Mia sulking or even sleeping, but nothing prepared him for the view before him. He stopped in his tracks, momentarily forgetting his anger as he took in the scene he was met with in the room. Mia moved around the room, arranging her things, but that wasn't what stopped him in his tracks. It was the way she was dressed. He'd never seen her dress like that before. She wore a pair of shorts that stopped slightly below her buttocks, giving him the full view of her rounded ass that gave him the strong urge to squeeze them. She wasn't wearing a shirt but a bikini bra that only covered a small part of her breasts, with earbuds plugged into her ears. The sight of her milky white legs and the bare expanse of her midriff left Neil mesmerized and aroused. He had come here to demand of her why she'd left their room, and to scold the living daylights out of her, but now he found himself unable to move nor make his presence known to her as she moved around with the earbuds plugged in her ears. And when she bent over to pick up something, Neil felt his erection harden with desire. Leaning against the doorframe, he crossed his arms over his chest and watched her. Her brown hair was tied into a messy bun, exposing the elegant curve of her long neck. As she turned to the side, the small bump of their baby made its presence known, a tender and beautiful sight to him. Mia, oblivious to his presence, swayed slightly to the music she was listening to, trying to dance along. Her movements were graceful and unself-conscious, adding to her allure. Neil's eyes roved over her, taking in every detail, from the curve of her hips to the soft, almost ethereal glow of her skin that made him want to run his hands over them. Just the thought of him touching her made his trousers tighten, and he muttered a curse. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, Neil knocked loudly on the open door. Mia jumped, startled, and quickly pulled out her earbuds. She turned to face him, her eyes widening in surprise and then narrowing slightly in curiosity. "Neil, you scared me," she exclaimed, a hand flying to her chest. He pushed off from the doorframe, his anger resurfacing but tempered by the sight of her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Why did you move your things out of our room?" Mia looked around the room, then back at him, her expression a mix of defiance and apology. "I just needed some space to myself," she said softly. "I thought it would be best we stayed in separate rooms." When Neil wasn't at home, she'd done some thinking of ways to subtly hint to him that there were things that needed to be done about their relationship before they'd move to the stage of marriage, which she knew he intended for them to have after the banquet. She'd been going through her old journals from high school and university. She realized her past aspirations, to experience traditional courtship, receive flowers, and more. Having faced challenges in life without many cherished memories to hold on to, she desired to create more joyful moments before committing to marriage with Neil. She longed for the excitement of dating and the stage of having a boyfriend before becoming a wife. It might sound stupid, but she felt like they'd be moving too quickly by getting married immediately when in truth they'd only known each other for months. Months, because she'd only known him for a few months in Ivy Grove before he was sentenced to prison. Then for the past 5 years they'd been apart with no communication whatsoever. And after they met again, they'd known each other for another few months without actually giving a name to their relationship apart from being lovers. She wanted more than that. Perhaps it was because she was a hopeless romantic person who wanted more in a relationship than marriage and babies. And since she couldn't tell him straight to the face what she wanted, she decided to hint it to him. However, she never planned for what was about to happen next. Neil's gray eyes darkened, and he took a step closer. "Why did you think it was all right for you to leave our room?" His voice was harsher now, edged with the panic and fear that had gripped him earlier. "I thought you'd left me. Do you have any idea how that felt?" Mia's defiance melted away, replaced by a look of remorse. "I'm sorry, I scared you," she said, almost glad that he didn't seem to mind that she'd moved out of the room, until he stepped inside the room completely and began to carry her suitcase. "I'll take your things back to our room. There is no use in being in separate rooms when we'd be married in a few weeks." "Wait, you can't do that." She hurriedly stopped him by grabbing the suitcase from his hand. Neil frowned at her actions. "Why?" he asked, narrowing his eyes in suspicion. "Nothing. I just want to stay here," she said defensively. "Why would you want to stay in a guest room when we have our room?" he said, sounding and looking displeased at her plan of having a separate room from his. He'd looked forward to coming home to relax and bask in the warmth of her presence, not to argue on where she'd be staying when it had already been decided. "It's not proper for us to stay in the same room when we are not married. My late mom had at least taught me that before her passing, and I intend to use every single one of her teachings. Then let's get married tomorrow. I will arrange the marriage certificate and—" "No, I don't want to get married tomorrow, or next, or even a week from now." She cut him off, angry that he couldn't understand her. "Then what the hell do you want?" he fired back, flinging the suitcase against the wall in anger. "I'm trying my damnedest to understand you, Mia. Don't try my patience. Do you want us to get married or not?" he demanded coolly. "No," she retorted with the same icy voice. "I don't want to get married without getting what I wanted." "Then what the fuck do you want?" "Nothing," she yelled, wishing she could just tell him, but then what was the point of it if she told him? Every little moment would lose its magic when it didn't come naturally from him. "Fine," he said, his voice sounding detached and blank, his eyes as hard as ice. "Suit yourself." Then he left, slamming the door behind him with so much force it made her jump. Chapter 215 The Doctor Who Performed the Surgery. After Neil left the room, Mia remained glued to her position, staring at the slammed door with tears filling her eyes. Perhaps she was asking for too much? Perhaps she was being unreasonable by wanting to be courted by the man she loved? But no matter how unreasonable it might seem, she wanted it so badly she'd give anything to have just a few days of being courted before marriage. She knew Neil wasn't the kind of man to figure out something like that without her saying it, but she wanted him to. Recalling the look he'd given her before he left the room, she felt her heart tighten into a knot and her throat burn with emotions. He'd looked at her like she was an unreasonable woman with no sense at all. That detached look of his that she hated seeing on his face had been there before he left her in the room. Determined to stay in the guest room until Neil figured out what she wanted, Mia resumed arranging her things. She needed to soothe his anger and continue hinting to him that he needed to court her and propose to her before marriage. She wanted to have a romantic story to tell their future children when they'd ask how their father had proposed to her. He'd not even asked her to marry him properly, but he wanted them to just go ahead and get married. She'd even realized this afternoon that he referred to her as "my wife" to the maids, which had made her stomach flutter with butterflies, but then made her more determined to have him propose on his knees. That was how it ought to be done. By the time Mia was done arranging her things, it was already time for dinner. She took a quick shower and wore a set of comfortable home attire. When Neil had come into the room earlier, she'd noticed the weary dark circles around his eyes. Perhaps she could give him a massage and help him sleep after dinner to soothe his anger, she decided, as she left the room hoping to find him in their room. But when she entered, he was not there. Thinking he had already gone down for dinner, she went downstairs into the dining room. The long dinner table was set with a delicious array of meals, most of them her favorites, making her mouth water. But when she saw that Neil wasn't there, she asked the housekeeper who was approaching her with some shopping bags. The housekeeper bowed slightly and said, "Mr. asked me to give you this when you come down for dinner." Mia took the bags with a puzzled expression. She then asked the housekeeper where Neil was at the moment. "Mr. left a while ago in his car," said the housekeeper. "Did he say where he was going?" Mia asked. The housekeeper shook her head no and left to instruct the other maids to set the table for Mia. Mia felt her heart knot with guilt. He was angry, she knew, and instead of staying to have his dinner at home, he'd left the house. She looked down at the shopping bags in her hands and brought out one of the boxes inside. Opening the box out of curiosity, she found a set of shimmering diamond necklaces and earrings. They were rare black diamonds, beautifully cut and set in an exquisite design. "Oh, Neil," Mia muttered, rubbing the necklace with a smile on her face. The guilt gnawed at her even more. She knew he had been trying, but she also knew that she needed more than just gifts. She needed him to understand her feelings, her desires. She placed the necklace back in the box, took a deep breath, and resolved to talk to him properly when he returned. For now, she would have dinner and wait for him, hoping they could bridge the gap between them when he returned. However, despite how hungry she was, she could barely eat her food as she knew no doubt Neil hadn't eaten anything. He was the kind to neglect his mealtime, and she knew he hadn't had lunch and now he left the house without dinner. Unable to eat alone, Mia asked the housekeeper to put the food away in the food warmers until Neil was back, and then she proceeded to the living room to wait for his return. Neil drove through the night city as if the hounds of hell were chasing him. His hands were tightened around the steering wheel in anger, knuckles white with tension. A burning cigarette was clenched between his fingers as he navigated the car with one hand. Fury simmered beneath his composed exterior, threatening to boil over. He couldn't believe Mia didn't want to marry him after everything. He'd thought she loved him, so what had made her change her mind now? Those thoughts swirled in his mind, tormenting him. He was never one to understand women, and he sure as hell didn't understand his woman. Damn her for making him so angry. He had looked forward to sleeping together with her tonight, but now he was driving down to the dungeon to vent his rage on some damned doctor who'd worked for Kelvin Rodrigo. He'd hoped to announce their marriage to the world soon, but it seemed that wasn't going to happen with Mia backing out now. Perhaps she didn't want him anymore? With that thought, Neil slammed his fist on the steering wheel and stepped on the gas. The car roared down the road, his anger propelling him faster. In a flash, he arrived at the rundown building in the isolated part of Mirage Mesa. Climbing out of his car, he took a long drag of his cigarette before discarding it and striding into the building. His expression was murderous, his strides long and determined. The building was dark, but he navigated the shadows with ease. When he reached the underground dungeon, his men began to bow in greeting. Ignoring them, he entered the special cell for questioning criminals. Despite not being in the military anymore, Neil still had a deep connection with them. Even though they'd requested for him to return and take back his position after his release, Neil had ignored them just like they had ignored him when he needed their help in prison. However, few of his soldiers were loyal enough to him to quit from the military just like him, and one of them had been Zephyr and the other bodyguards who answered to him now. Inside the cell room, Liam, whom Neil had called on his way here, and Zephyr, and James stood around a bleeding man tied to an electric chair. The sight of them barely registered in Neil's mind. His focus was entirely on the man who would bear the brunt of his wrath. The man's eyes could barely open as he looked up to see who came in. As if recognizing Neil, he seemed relieved and glad. "Mr. Wayner," he cried out desperately, "tell these animals to let me go. I've told them everything I know." "You told us nothing but the fact that you no longer work for Kelvin Rodrigo," said James. "That's not what we want to hear. Tell us the full details of your work and what you did for him in the past to become his private doctor." "That's all we asked for, Mr. Howell." Mr. Howell glared at James, then at Zephyr, who'd been torturing him for days, then back at Liam and Neil. "I know nothing. Let me go. I have a flight to catch," he cried. Neil's gaze was icy as he stepped forward, his presence filling the room with a palpable tension. Mr. Howell whimpered, his eyes widening with terror as Neil began to approach him. The overhead light cast harsh shadows on Neil's face, highlighting the lines of anger etched into his features. "What's the status, James?" Neil asked, his voice a low growl. James stepped forward, clearing his throat. "He's denying the fact that he was part of the surgical body packing of children. And our investigation said otherwise. He was the main doctor who performed the surgeries." "You lying pig shit," Mr. Howell cursed. "I didn't do anything wrong. If I get out of here, I will sue your dirty ass for kidnapping." "You!" A bone-crushing punch landed on his face before he could complete his threat. Neil cracked his knuckles after breaking the man's teeth. He leaned down, his face inches from the trembling doctor. "You know who I am," he said quietly, "but you don't know what I can do to you when angered. Tell me everything about what you did for Kelvin Rodrigo, or I promise you'll wish you were dead." The man's terrified eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Neil's anger was a living thing, coiled tight and ready to strike. He had no patience left, no time for games, especially when he'd been angered from home, and everyone in the cell room could sense it as they watched him take over the questioning. When Neil saw the terrified look in the man's eyes, he said, "Now tell me, why did you visit the Rodrigo estate every 5 months 20 years ago?" Mr. Howell didn't dare to continue denying his involvement after he saw the murderous look in those gray eyes piercing into his soul and the knife glimmering in Neil's hands. I went there to do my work as scheduled for me." "And what is this work of yours?" Neil asked impatiently. "Trust me, I was doing my job or else Mr. Rodrigo would kill me." "I didn't. What was your work at his residence?" Neil repeated, uninterested in anything other than that. I was to perform some surgical procedures on a little girl, his daughter. Mr. Rodrigo didn't want to be caught delivering some substances into other countries as that would ruin his reputation and send his old ass to prison, so he made me perform the procedure on the girl to hide the substance within her body. I told him the risk, but he didn't seem to care enough for the girl and ordered me to do the job. At first, I did one procedure to hide it in her stomach, and thanks to my skills, she came back alive after the delivery was complete. But she was sick for a whole month, throwing up every meal she ate. Neil listened to the sickening things performed on little Mia, with rage surging through his veins and clouding his mind. The second procedure was performed in her stomach 5 months after the first one. We almost lost her that time, but thankfully she survived. The girl was strong. It was a miracle she kept on surviving. Sometimes I wished she'd just die and rest from all the pain she had to endure. I know I wasn't supposed to feel anything while doing the job, but there were times I couldn't bear to look into her eyes. The last procedure was performed on her right thigh because we couldn't do any more in her stomach. I told Mr. Rodrigo that we could lose her, or she could get paralyzed in the leg. But he pointed a gun at me and told me to shut up and do my work unless I wanted to die. I recall he used to refer to the girl as a thing, not a human nor his child. That was my last procedure of planting substances within her body, but it wasn't my last surgery on her. He trailed off, a look of remorse masking his face as he tried to avoid Neil's gray eyes. "Why are you making me go through this all over again, Mr. Wayner?" he cried. "I regret everything I did in the past, and I've paid for my sins with the lives of my family after I quit my job with Kelvin." Neil angrily grabbed his bloody collar and pulled him along with the electric chair up. With a vein throbbing on his forehead, he gritted, "Don't bullshit me into feeling sorry for you. You're an asshole and a heartless bastard. I want to rip off your head so badly my head hurts from listening to the shit you did to my woman. If you know what's fucking best for you, you better tell me every single thing you did to her, or may God help you."